Introduction. In this lesson we will learn about various Selenium-Python integration interview questions. Topics include basic concepts, intermediate concepts, advanced concepts, Selenium grid and parallel testing, DevOps, Selenium DevOps, performance testing, Selenium Best Practices, Selenium and Emerging Trends, Selenium and Accessibility testing, Selenium and cloud-based testing, reporting, troubleshooting, future trends, additional considerations, basic concepts. First question: what is Selenium WebDriver and how does it integrate with Python? And the answer is Selenium WebDriver is an open source API used to automate web browser. In Python, it's integrated using the Selenium library, for example from Selenium import WebDriver. Question: what are the key components of Selenium WebDriver in Python? And the answer is WebDriver, web element, by, keys, actions chains, select for example driver equals WebDriver, Chrome. Next question: issue do you launch different browser using Selenium WebDriver in Python? And the answer is use specific browser drivers, Chrome driver, Gecko driver, etc. and specify the path to the driver executable, for example driver equals WebDriver, Chrome. Path to Chrome driver. Next question is explain the concept of locators in Selenium Python, and the answer is locators are used to identify web elements. Common locators include ID, name, class name, tag name, link text, partial link text, XPath, and CSS selector, for example element equals driver, find underscore element. By, ID, username. Next question: issue do you handle web elements in Selenium Python? And the answer is use WebDriver methods like find underscore element, find underscore elements, click, send underscore keys, clear, etc. to interact with web elements, for example element, send underscore keys, your underscore username. Next question is what is the difference between implicit and explicit waits in Selenium Python? And the answer is implicit wait sets a global timeout for all find element actions, while explicit wait is used to wait for a specific condition before proceeding. For example driver, implicitly underscore wait. 10. For implicit wait, using WebDriver wait for explicit wait. Intermediate concepts. Question: how do you handle alerts, pop-ups, and frames in Selenium Python? And the answer is use switch underscore to alert, switch underscore to window, and switch underscore to frame methods, for example alert equals driver, switch underscore to alert for handling alerts. Next question is explain the page object model, POM, design pattern in Selenium Python, and the answer is POM separates page elements and their corresponding actions into separate classes, for example creating separate classes for different pages of a web application. Next question: issue do you perform data-driven testing with Selenium in Python? And the answer is use external data sources like CSV, Excel, or databases and parameterize test cases, for example reading data from a CSV file and passing it to test cases. Next question is what is the role of the actions class in Selenium Python? And the answer is actions class is used to perform complex mouse interactions like click and hold, drag and drop, and context clicks, for example using actions driver, move underscore to underscore element, element, click, perform, for clicking an element. Next question: issue do you handle exceptions in Selenium Python? And the answer is use try except blocks to handle exceptions like nosage element exception, element not visible exception, etc. for example using try except to handle element not found exceptions. Advanced concepts. Question: how can you integrate Selenium with testing frameworks like ptest or unit test? And the answer is use the respective frameworks features to structure and run Selenium tests. For example, creating ptest test cases using at ptest fixture for setup and teardown. Next question is explain the concept of shadow DOM and how to handle it with Selenium Python. And the answer is shadow DOM is an encapsulated part of the DOM. Use JavaScript executor to access shadow DOM elements, for example using execute_script to access shadow root elements. Next question is: do you handle asynchronous web applications with Selenium Python? And the answer is use explicit waits and JavaScript executor to handle asynchronous operations. For example using WebDriver wait to wait for AJAX calls to complete. Next question is: what are some performance optimization techniques for Selenium Python scripts? And the answer is minimize test script complexity, use efficient locators, optimize waits, and leverage parallel execution, for example using page object model to improve code readability and maintainability. Next question is: do you handle cross-browser testing with Selenium Python? And the answer is use Selenium Grid or cloud-based testing platforms to execute tests on different browser and operating systems, for example configuring Selenium Grid for parallel test execution on different browser. Selenium Grid and parallel testing. Question: what is Selenium Grid? And how do you use it with Python? And the answer is Selenium Grid is a tool for distributing tests across multiple machines to execute tests in parallel. Use remote WebDriver to connect to a Selenium Grid hub, for example configuring a Selenium Grid hub and node, then creating a remote WebDriver instance. Next question is: do you handle test data management in Selenium Python? And the answer is use external data sources like CSV, Excel, or databases, and parameterize test cases, for example reading test data from a CSV file and passing it as parameters to test cases. Next question is explain the concept of test environment management with Selenium Python, and answer is manage different test environments. Development, staging, production, using configuration files or environment variables, for example using environment variables to store environment-specific configurations. Selenium and DevOps. Question: how do you integrate Selenium Python with CI/CD pipelines? And the answer is integrate Selenium tests into CI/CD pipelines using tools like Jenkins, GitLab CI/CD, or Circle CI, for example triggering Selenium tests on code changes using Jenkins. Next question is: what is the role of Selenium in a DevOps environment? And the answer is Selenium provides automated testing, enabling continuous testing, faster feedback loops, and improved software quality, for example integrating Selenium tests into the CI/CD pipeline for continuous testing. Selenium and performance testing. Question: can Selenium be used for performance testing? And the answer is while Selenium is primarily for functional testing, it can be used for basic performance metrics like response times. Dedicated performance testing tools are better suited for in-depth analysis, for example measuring page load times using Selenium. Next question is: can you measure page load times using Selenium Python? And the answer is use time to measure elapsed time before and after page load, for example calculating page load time using Python's time module. Selenium Best Practices. Question: how do you improve the maintainability of Selenium Python test scripts? And the answer is use clear and descriptive naming conventions. Modularize code. Use page object model. And version control. For example, creating well-structured page objects and using meaningful variable names. Next question is: what are the common pitfalls to avoid in Selenium Python scripting? And the answer is improper locator usage, synchronization issues, test data management problems, and environment inconsistencies, for example implementing robust wait mechanism. Next question: issue: do you handle test failures in debugging in Selenium Python? And the answer is use debugging tools, print statements, and error handling to identify and fix issues, for example using Python's built-in debugger to inspect variables and execution flow. Selenium and Emerging Trends. Question: how can you integrate AI and machine learning with Selenium Python? And the answer is use AI libraries like TensorFlow or PyTorch to build models for image recognition, natural language processing, and predictive analytics, for example using machine learning to predict test case failures. Next question is: what is the role of Selenium in test automation frameworks? And the answer is Selenium is a core component for web UI automation. But it's part of a larger framework that includes test data management, reporting, and environment setup, for example integrating Selenium with ptest and Illio for a comprehensive test automation framework. Selenium and mobile testing. Question: can Selenium be used for mobile app testing? And the answer is while Selenium is primarily for web applications, it can be used with tools like APM to test hybrid apps, for example using APM to control mobile devices and Selenium for web view interactions. Next question: issue: do you handle different screen sizes and resolutions in Selenium Python? And the answer is use device emulators or real devices to test on different screen sizes and resolutions, for example using APM to test on different device configurations. Selenium and security testing. Question: how can Selenium be used for security testing in Python? And the answer is Selenium can be used for basic security testing like authentication, authorization, and input validation. However, dedicated security testing tools are recommended for comprehensive security assessments, for example testing login functionality with different credentials. Next question is: what security best practices should be followed when using Selenium Python? And the answer is avoid hard-coding sensitive information, use secure communication protocols, and validate user input, for example using environment variables to store sensitive data. Selenium and accessibility testing. Question: how can Selenium be used for accessibility testing in Python? And the answer is use Selenium with accessibility testing tools like AXE or PA11Y to check for WCAG compliance, for example integrating AXE with Selenium to identify accessibility issues. Next question is: what are the common accessibility issues that can be tested with Selenium Python? And the answer is color contrast, keyboard navigation, alternative text for images, and screen reader compatibility, for example checking for sufficient color contrast using Selenium. And accessibility tools. Selenium and cloud-based testing. Question: how do you leverage cloud-based platforms for Selenium Python testing? And the answer is use cloud-based Selenium grid providers like Sauce Labs, Browser Stack, or AWS Device Farm, for example running tests on different browser and operating systems using Sauce Labs. Next question is: what are the benefits of using cloud-based testing for Selenium Python? And the answer is access to a wide range of browser and devices. Scalability. and faster test execution, for example using cloud-based platforms to test on different mobile devices. Selenium and reporting. Question: how do you generate test reports in Selenium Python? And the answer is use reporting frameworks like ptest HTML, Alio, or custom reporting mechanisms, for example generating HTML reports using ptest HTML. Next question is what information should be included in Selenium test reports? And the answer is test case execution status, test results, screenshots, logs, and performance metrics, for example including test case pass, fail status and screenshots in test reports. Selenium Python integration, best practices and troubleshooting. Question: what are the best practices for writing maintainable Selenium Python test scripts? And the answer is use clear and descriptive naming conventions, modularize code, use page object model, and implement robust error handling, for example creating reusable page objects and using meaningful variable names. Next question: issue do you handle test data management effectively in Selenium Python? And the answer is use external data sources like CSV, Excel, or databases, and parameterize test cases, for example using ptest's parameterize decorator to pass test data to test cases. Next question is what are the common challenges faced while using Selenium Python? And the answer is handling dynamic elements, synchronization issues, test flakiness, and environment inconsistencies, for example implementing explicit waits and retry mechanisms to handle dynamic elements. Next question: issue do you debug Selenium Python test failures effectively? And the answer is use debugging tools, print statements, and error handling to identify and fix issues, for example using Python's built-in debugger to inspect variables and execution flow. Next question: issue do you improve the performance of Selenium Python test scripts? And the answer is minimize test script complexity, use efficient locators, optimize waits, and leverage parallel execution, for example using Selenium Grid for parallel test execution. Selenium Python and future trends. Question: how can AI and machine learning be integrated with Selenium Python for test automation? And the answer is use AI libraries to generate test cases, predict test failures, and optimize test suites, for example using machine learning to identify test cases with high failure rates. Next question is what is the role of Selenium Python in the future of test automation? And the answer is Selenium will continue to be a core component for web UI automation. But it will be complemented by AI, machine learning, and cloud-based technologies, for example integrating Selenium with AI-powered test automation platforms. Next question: issue can you stay updated with the latest trends and developments in Selenium Python? And the answer is follow Selenium documentation, online forums, and developer communities. Attend conferences and workshops, for example subscribing to Selenium mailing lists and following Selenium blogs. Additional Selenium Python considerations. Question: how do you handle cross-site scripting, XSS, vulnerabilities in Selenium Python tests? And the answer is use parameterized input and avoid injecting untrusted data into web pages, for example using parameterized input to prevent XSS attacks. Next question: issue do you ensure security best practices when using Selenium Python? And the answer is avoid hard-coding credentials, use secure communication protocols, and validate user input, for example storing sensitive information in environment variables. Next question is what is the importance of accessibility testing in Selenium Python? And the answer is accessibility testing ensures that web applications are usable by people with disabilities. Use tools like ACS or PA11Y to check for accessibility issues. For example, integrating ACS with Selenium to identify accessibility violations. Selenium DevOps Python integration interview questions. In this lesson we will learn about various Selenium DevOps Python integration interview questions. Topics include basic concepts, integration with DevOps tool, test data management and environment setup, test data management and environment setup, test automation framework and CI/CD integration, performance and scalability, cloud-based testing and security. Basic concepts. Question: what is Selenium WebDriver and its role in DevOps? And the answer is Selenium WebDriver is an open-source API to automate web browser. In DevOps, it's used for test automation within CI/CD pipelines, for example integrating Selenium tests into Jenkins pipeline. Next question: issue does Python integrate with Selenium WebDriver for DevOps? And the answer is Python provides a language binding for Selenium WebDriver, enabling scripting and automation, for example using from Selenium import WebDriver in Python scripts. Next question is: what is the significance of test automation in a DevOps environment? And the answer is test automation accelerates development cycles, improves software quality, and enables continuous delivery. For example, implementing Selenium tests as part of a CI/CD pipeline. Question is: what is the relationship between Selenium, Python, and DevOps tools? And the answer is Selenium for test automation, Python for scripting, and DevOps tools, Jenkins, Git, Docker, for CI/CD orchestration, for example using Jenkins to trigger Selenium Python tests on code changes. Next question: issue do you structure Selenium test cases for integration into DevOps pipelines? And the answer is modularized tests, use descriptive naming, and follow best practices for maintainability, for example creating reusable test modules and using page object model. Integration with DevOps tools. Question: how do you integrate Selenium Python tests with Jenkins? And the answer is use Jenkins plugins like Selenium, Maven, or Gradle to trigger tests, for example creating a Jenkins job to execute Selenium Python test suite. Next question is: what is the role of version control in Selenium Python test automation? And the answer is manage test scripts, data, and configurations effectively, for example using Git for version control of Selenium test scripts. Next question: issue do you handle test environments and configurations in a DevOps context? And the answer is use environment variables, configuration files, or cloud-based platforms, for example storing test environment details in environment variables. Next question is: explain the concept of continuous integration and its relation to Selenium, Python. And the answer is continuously integrate code changes and run Selenium tests to detect issues early, for example triggering Selenium tests on every code commit. Next question: issue do you implement continuous delivery with Selenium Python? And the answer is automate deployment to different environments after successful test execution, for example deploying to staging environment after successful Selenium tests. Test data management and environment setup. Question: how do you manage test data in Selenium Python for DevOps? And the answer is use external data sources like CSV, Excel, or databases, and parameterize tests, for example using ptests parameterize for data-driven testing. Next question is: explain the importance of test environment consistency in DevOps. And the answer is ensure test reliability and reproducibility across different environments, for example using virtualization or containerization for consistent test environments. Next question is: show do you handle multiple test environments in Selenium, Python and DevOps? And the answer is use configuration management tools or environment variables, for example creating different configuration files for different environments. Next question is: what are the challenges in managing test data and environments in a DevOps context? And the answer is data privacy, security, and environment provisioning, for example encrypting sensitive test data and using infrastructure as code for environment setup. Next question is: show do you ensure data privacy and security in Selenium Python test automation? And the answer is avoid hard-coding sensitive data, use secure data storage, and implement access controls, for example using environment variables to store sensitive information. Test automation framework and CI/CD integration. Question: how do you build a robust test automation framework using Selenium Python? And the answer is combine Selenium with testing frameworks like ptest or unit test. And use tools like Allio for reporting, for example creating a ptest-based test automation framework with custom fixtures and reporting. Next question is: what are the key components of a Selenium Python-based test automation framework? And the answer is test data management, test environment setup, test execution, reporting, and integration with CI/CD, for example using a combination of ptest, Allio, and Jenkins for a test automation framework. Next question is: show do you implement continuous testing in a DevOps pipeline using Selenium Python? And the answer is integrate Selenium tests into CI/CD pipeline to execute tests on every code change, for example triggering Selenium tests on code commits using Jenkins. Next question is: explain the concept of shift-left testing and its role in Selenium Python and DevOps. And the answer is shift testing to earlier stages of development for faster feedback, for example integrating unit and integration tests along with Selenium UI tests. Next question is: show do you handle test failures and retries in a CI/CD pipeline? And the answer is implement retry mechanisms and failure notifications, for example using Jenkins. Retry functionality for failed test cases. Performance and scalability. Question: how do you measure test execution performance in Selenium Python? And the answer is use performance testing tools or Python's time module to measure execution time, for example using time to measure test execution time. Next question is: what strategies can be used to improve Selenium Python test performance? And the answer is optimize locators, use page object model, parallel execution, and minimize test script complexity, for example using Selenium Grid for parallel test execution. Next question is: show do you handle scaling Selenium tests for large-scale projects? And the answer is use Selenium Grid, cloud-based testing platforms, and test data management strategies, for example distributing tests across multiple Selenium Grid nodes. Next question is: what are the performance implications of different locators in Selenium Python? And the answer is some locators, ID, name, are faster than others. XPath, CSS selector, for example using ID or name locators whenever possible. Next question is: show do you balance test coverage and test execution time in Selenium Python? And the answer is prioritize critical test cases and use test case prioritization techniques, for example focusing on high-risk test cases for faster feedback. Cloud-based testing and security. Question: how do you leverage cloud-based platforms for Selenium Python testing? And the answer is use cloud-based Selenium grid providers like Source Labs, Browser Stack, or AWS Device Farm, for example running tests on different browser and operating systems using Source Labs. Next question is: what are the security considerations when integrating Selenium Python with cloud-based platforms? And the answer is protect sensitive data, use secure communication, and comply with security standards, for example using environment variables to store sensitive information. Next question: issue: do you handle test data security in a cloud-based environment? And the answer is encrypt sensitive data and use secure data storage, for example encrypting test data before uploading to cloud storage. Next question is: what are the benefits of using cloud-based testing for Selenium Python in DevOps? And the answer is scalability, access to different environments, and reduced infrastructure costs, for example leveraging cloud-based platforms for parallel test execution. Hi, in this lesson we will learn about the various Selenium interview questions based on the below topics: basic Selenium concepts, intermediate Selenium concepts, Selenium and testing frameworks, advanced Selenium concepts, Selenium architecture and performance, Selenium and DevOps, Selenium and mobile testing, Selenium and API testing, Selenium Best Practices, Selenium and cloud-based testing, Selenium and security testing, Selenium challenges and troubleshooting, Selenium and other tools, Selenium Best Practices, Selenium and future trends. Let's see the interview questions on basic Selenium concepts. First question: what is Selenium? And the answer is Selenium is an open source portable software testing framework for web applications. For example, used for automating web browser interactions. Next question: what are the different components of Selenium? And the answer is Selenium WebDriver, Selenium Grid, Selenium IDE, for example Selenium WebDriver for automating browser actions, Selenium Grid for distributed test execution, Selenium IDE for recording and replaying test cases. Next question: what is Selenium WebDriver? And the answer is Selenium WebDriver is a popular component that allows you to control web browser through programs and scripts. For example using WebDriver to automate a login test. Next question: what are the different types of locators in Selenium? And the answer is ID, name, class name, tag name, link text, partial link text, XPath, CSS selector, for example using XPath to locate an element with specific text. Next question: explain the difference between find element and find elements. And the answer is find element returns the first matching element, while find elements returns a list of all matching elements. For example using find element to click a button, using find elements to get a list of links. Next question: what is WebDriver wait? And the answer is WebDriver wait is used to synchronize test execution with the web page's loading time. For example using WebDriver wait to wait for an element to be visible. Next question: what are the different types of waits in Selenium? And the answer is implicit wait, explicit wait, fluent wait, for example using explicit wait to wait for a specific condition. Next question: what is the difference between implicit wait and explicit wait? And the answer is implicit wait sets a global timeout for all elements, while explicit wait sets a timeout for a specific condition. For example using implicit wait to handle dynamic elements, using explicit wait to wait for an element to be clickable. Next question: what is page object model? POM. And the answer is POM is a design pattern that separates page objects from test cases. improving code readability and maintainability. For example, creating page objects for different pages of a web application. Next question: what is TestNG? And the answer is TestNG is a testing framework inspired by JUnit and NUnit. It provides features like annotations, data-driven testing, and parallel execution. For example, using TestNG annotations to create test cases and test suites. Next question: how do you handle alerts, pop-ups, and frames in Selenium? And the answer is using alert interface for alerts, window handles for pop-ups, and switch to method for frames. For example, handling a confirmation alert, switching to a child window, switching to a frame. Next question: what is the difference between verification and validation? And the answer is verification checks if the application behaves as expected, while validation checks if the application meets the specified requirements. For example, verifying the title of a page, validating the login functionality. Next question: how do you handle dynamic elements in Selenium? And the answer is using explicit waits, JavaScript executor, or finding elements based on partial attributes. For example, handling a dynamically changing elements ID using JavaScript executor. Next question: how do you perform cross-browser testing using Selenium? And the answer is using Selenium Grid or cloud-based testing platforms. For example, setting up Selenium Grid to run tests on different browser. Next question: how do you handle exceptions in Selenium? And the answer is using try-catch blocks to handle exceptions like no-such element exception, element not visible exception, etc. For example, handling no-such element exception when trying to find an element. Let's see the interview questions on intermediate Selenium concepts. Next question: what is the difference between hard and soft assertions in TestNG? And the answer is hard assertions stop test execution on failure, while soft assertions continue execution, collecting all failures to be reported at the end. For example, using hard assertions for critical validations, using soft assertions for non-critical checks. Next question: explain the architecture of Selenium Grid. And the answer is Selenium Grid consists of a hub and nodes. The hub acts as a central registry, while nodes execute tests on different environments. For example, setting up a Selenium Grid with multiple nodes for parallel test execution. Next question: how do you handle dynamic web elements in Selenium? And the answer is use explicit waits, JavaScript executor, or find elements based on partial attributes. For dynamic IDs, use regular expressions or generate dynamic locators. For example, using JavaScript executor to get the dynamic ID and then constructing a dynamic XPath. Next question: what is the difference between Selenium WebDriver and Selenium RC? And the answer is Selenium WebDriver is the latest and recommended approach, providing direct control over the browser. Selenium RC is the older version that relies on JavaScript injection. For example, comparing the architecture and capabilities of WebDriver and RC. Next question: how do you handle iframes in Selenium? And the answer is use the switch to method to switch to an iframe. You can switch back to the main content using default content. For example, switching to an iframe containing a login form and then switching back. Next question: what is the use of actions class in Selenium? And the answer is actions class is used to perform complex mouse interactions like click and hold, drag and drop, and context clicks. For example, performing a drag and drop operation using actions class. Next question: how do you handle authentication pop-ups in Selenium? And the answer is use the authenticate method of WebDriver to handle basic authentication pop-ups. For other types of authentication, you might need to use third-party tools. For example, handling basic authentication using the authenticate method. Next question: explain the concept of implicit and explicit waits in detail. And the answer is: implicit wait sets a global timeout for all find element commands, while explicit wait is used for specific waiting conditions. Explicit waits are more reliable. For example, using implicit wait for general timeouts and explicit wait for specific elements to be visible or clickable. Next question: what are the different types of exceptions in Selenium? And the answer is: no such element exception, element not visible exception, stale element reference exception, timeout exception, and more. For example, handling no such element exception using try-catch block. Next question: how do you handle file uploads in Selenium? And the answer is: use the send keys method to send the file path to the file input element. For complex file upload dialogues, you might need to use automation tools or browser extensions. For example, uploading a file using the send keys method. Let's see the interview questions on Selenium and testing frameworks. Next question: how do you integrate Selenium with test-ng or JUnit? And the answer is: use annotations like at test, at before, at after, and at data provider to create test cases and data-driven tests. For example, creating a test-ng test class with data-driven testing using at data provider. Next question: what is the role of a page factory in Selenium? And the answer is: page factory is a design pattern that reduces code redundancy by using annotations to map web elements to page objects. For example, creating page objects using page factory and annotations. Next question: how do you implement data-driven testing in Selenium? And the answer is: use testings at data provider annotation or external data sources like Excel or CSV files. For example, reading data from an Excel file and passing it to the test method. Next question: how do you generate test reports in Selenium? And the answer is: use reporting frameworks like extent reports, testings built-in reporting, or third-party tools. For example, generating an extent reports HTML report after test execution. Let's see the interview questions on advanced Selenium concepts. Next question: how do you handle dynamic web elements in Selenium? And the answer is: use explicit waits, JavaScript executor, or find elements based on partial attributes. For dynamic IDs, use regular expressions or generate dynamic locators. For example, using JavaScript executor to get the dynamic ID and then constructing a dynamic XPath. Next question: what is the difference between Selenium WebDriver and Selenium RC? And the answer is: Selenium WebDriver is the latest and recommended approach, providing direct control over the browser. Selenium RC is the older version that relies on JavaScript injection. For example, comparing the architecture and capabilities of WebDriver and RC. Next question: how do you handle iframes in Selenium? And the answer is: use the switch to method to switch to an iframe. You can switch back to the main content using default content. For example, switching to an iframe containing a login form and then switching back. Next question: what is the use of actions class in Selenium? And the answer is: actions class is used to perform complex mouse interactions like click and hold, drag and drop, and context clicks. For example, performing a drag and drop operation using actions class. Next question: how do you handle authentication pop-ups in Selenium? And the answer is: use the authenticate method of WebDriver to handle basic authentication pop-ups. For other types of authentication, you might need to use third-party tools. For example, handling basic authentication using the Authenticate. Method. Next question, explain the concept of implicit and explicit waits in detail. And the answer is: implicit wait sets a global timeout for all find element commands, while explicit wait is used for specific waiting conditions. Explicit waits are more reliable. For example, using implicit wait for general timeouts and explicit wait for specific elements to be visible or clickable. Next question, what are the different types of exceptions in Selenium? And the answer is no such element exception, element not visible exception, stale element reference exception, timeout exception, and more. For example, handling no such element exception using try-catch block. Next question, how do you handle file uploads in Selenium? And the answer is use the send keys method to send the file path to the file input element. For complex file upload dialogues, you might need to use automation tools or browser extensions. For example, uploading a file using pay send keys method. Let's see the interview questions on Selenium architecture and performance. Next question, how does Selenium WebDriver interact with the browser? And the answer is Selenium WebDriver interacts with the browser through browser-specific drivers. These drivers translate Selenium commands into browser-understandable actions. For example, using Chrome driver to control Chrome browser. Next question, explain the difference between Selenium Grid and Selenium Standalone Server. And pay. Answer is Selenium Grid is a distributed test execution environment with a hub and nodes. Selenium Standalone Server is a single node instance. For example, using Selenium Grid for parallel test execution across different machines. Next question, how can you optimize Selenium test execution performance? And the answer is optimize locators, minimize test script complexity, use efficient waits, leverage page object model, parallel execution, and hardware, software optimization. For example, using efficient XPath locators and minimizing unnecessary waits. Next question, what are the challenges of parallel test execution in Selenium Grid? And the answer is environment inconsistencies, test data management, dependency management, and handling shared resources. For example, ensuring test data isolation for parallel test execution. Let's see the interview questions on Selenium and DevOps. Next question, how do you integrate Selenium with CI/CD pipelines? And the answer is incorporate Selenium tests into build and deployment pipelines using tools like Jenkins, Maven, or Gradle. For example, triggering Selenium tests on code changes and integrating with deployment process. Next question, what is the role of Selenium in a DevOps environment? And the answer is Selenium provides automated testing, enabling continuous testing, faster feedback loops, and improved software quality. For example, integrating Selenium tests into the CI/CD pipeline for continuous testing. Next question, how do you handle test data management in Selenium? And the answer is use external data sources like Excel, CSV, or databases. Implement data-driven testing frameworks. For example, using testings at data provider to provide test data. Next question, explain the concept of environment-based test execution in Selenium. And the answer is configuring Selenium tests to run on different environments. Development, testing, production, using environment variables or configuration files. For example, running tests on different browser and operating systems using Selenium Grid. Let's see the interview questions on Selenium and mobile testing. Next question, can Selenium be used for mobile app testing? If yes, how? And the answer is while Selenium primarily focuses on web applications, Tools like Appium can be used in conjunction with Selenium for mobile app testing. For example, using Appium to automate mobile app testing and integrating with Selenium for web-based interactions. Next question: what are the limitations of Selenium for mobile testing? And the answer is Selenium is primarily designed for web applications. It might have limitations in testing native app features and interactions. For example, challenges in testing mobile-specific elements and gestures using Selenium. Next question: how do you handle hybrid apps using Selenium? And the answer is hybrid apps combine native and web views. Tools like Appium can be used to switch between native and web contexts for testing. For example, using Appium to interact with native elements and Selenium for web elements within a hybrid app. Let's see the interview questions on Selenium and API testing. Next question: can Selenium be used for API testing? If yes, how? And the answer is while Selenium is primarily for web UI testing, it's not ideal for API testing. Tools like Rest Assured or Postman are better suited for API interactions. However, you can use Selenium to test API-driven UIs. For example, using Rest Assured for API testing and Selenium for UI validation based on API responses. Next question: what are the alternatives to Selenium for API testing? And the answer is Rest Assured, Postman, JMeter, and other API testing tools offer dedicated features for API testing. For example, using Rest Assured for creating API test cases and validating responses. Let's see the interview questions on Selenium Best Practices and Troubleshooting. Next question: what are the best practices for writing maintainable Selenium test scripts? And the answer is use clear and descriptive naming conventions, modularize test code, follow page object model, and use effective locators. For example, creating reusable page objects and using meaningful variable names. Next question: how do you handle flaky tests in Selenium? And the answer is identify the root cause, timing issues, environment inconsistencies, or test data, use explicit waits, retry mechanisms, and robust error handling. For example, implementing retry logic for flaky test cases. Next question: how do you debug Selenium test failures effectively? And the answer is use debugging tools, logs, error messages, and browser developer tools to analyze the issue. For example, inspecting browser console logs for error messages. Next question: what are the common pitfalls to avoid when using Selenium? And the answer is improper locator usage, incorrect synchronization, test data management issues, environment inconsistencies, and test flakiness. For example, using reliable locators and implementing proper wait mechanisms. Let's see the interview questions on Selenium and cloud-based testing. Next question: how do you leverage cloud-based platforms for Selenium testing? And the answer is use cloud-based Selenium grid providers like Sauce Labs, Browser Stack, or AWS Device Farm to access different browser and devices. For example, running Selenium tests on multiple browser and operating systems using Sauce Labs. Next question: what are the benefits of using cloud-based Selenium testing? And the answer is access to a wide range of browser and devices, scalability, faster test execution, and reduced infrastructure costs. For example, leveraging cloud-based platforms to test on different mobile devices. Next question: how do you manage test environments in the cloud? And the answer is configure cloud-based platforms to create and manage test environments, including virtual machines and containers. For example, using AWS Device Farm to manage test environments for mobile app testing. Let's see the interview questions on Selenium and security testing. Next question: how can Selenium be used for security testing? And the answer is, while not a primary security testing tool, Selenium can be used to test security-related functionalities like authentication, authorization, input validation, and session management. For example, testing login functionality with different credentials and input validation. Next question: what are the security considerations when using Selenium? And the answer is: protect sensitive data, avoid hard-coding credentials, use secure communication protocols, and be aware of potential vulnerabilities in the Selenium environment. For example, using environment variables to store sensitive information and avoiding. Let's see the interview questions on Selenium challenges and troubleshooting. Next question: what are the common challenges faced while using Selenium? And the answer is: handling dynamic elements, iframe handling, alert handling, synchronization issues, test flakiness, and environment inconsistencies. For example, implementing robust wait mechanisms to handle dynamic elements. Next question: how do you handle stale element exceptions in Selenium? And the answer is: retry the action, use explicit waits, or find the element again. For example, implementing a retry mechanism for stale element exceptions. Next question: how do you handle multiple windows in Selenium? And the answer is: use get window handles to get a list of window handles and switch between them using switch to window. For example, switching to a new window opened by a link click. Next question: what is the difference between driver close and driver quit? And the answer is: driver close closes the current active window, while driver quit closes all browser windows associated with the WebDriver instance. For example, using driver quit to close all browser windows after test completion. Let's see the interview questions on Selenium and other tools. Next question: how do you integrate Selenium with other testing tools? And the answer is: integrate with testing frameworks like TestNG or JUnit. Build tools like Maven or Gradle, and continuous integration tools like Jenkins. For example, integrating Selenium tests with Jenkins for continuous testing. Next question: what is the role of Selenium in a testing automation framework? And the answer is: Selenium is a core component for web UI automation. It integrates with other tools for test data management, reporting, and environment setup. For example, creating a testing framework using Selenium, TestNG, and Maven. Let's see the interview questions on Selenium Best Practices. Next question: how can you improve the robustness of Selenium test scripts? And the answer is: use explicit waits, handle exceptions, implement retry mechanisms, and use descriptive locators. For example, using WebDriver wait to wait for elements before interacting. Next question: what are the key factors to consider when designing Selenium test cases? And the answer is: test case coverage, maintainability, reusability, and performance. For example, creating modular test cases with reusable functions. Next question: how do you optimize Selenium test scripts for performance? And the answer is: minimize test script complexity, use efficient locators, optimize waits, and leverage parallel execution. For example, using page object model to improve test script organization. Let's see the interview questions on Selenium and future trends. Next question: what are the future trends in Selenium testing? And the answer is: integration with AI and machine learning, cloud-based testing, headless browser testing, and increased focus on mobile testing. For example, using AI-powered test case generation and self-healing tests. Next question: how do you see Selenium evolving in the next few years? And the answer is expanding support for new browser and platforms, improving performance, and incorporating.
Do subscribe for more, and thanks for watching.